Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's session, Litigation in Light of COVID-19, Episode 9, How to Conduct a Remote Deposition. We have just two quick housekeeping announcements to get us started. The first announcement, you might have noticed you're in listen-only mode. This is to cut down on the amount of background noise. However, you're welcome to ask any questions that you might have during the presentation. Just simply put them into the questions button on your GoToWebinar pop-up. Second announcement, today's session is not for CLE credit. It is an informational session, but we do hope you'll join us for our future webinars. And now I'm going to turn you over to Michael Sander, who is the founding and managing director of Docket Alarm.
Hi, thank you, Erin. And thanks everybody for joining today. So today we're going to go over how to conduct a remote deposition. In our previous episodes, we actually went over how to conduct a remote hearing. We had somebody who appeared before a Texas judge remotely, had to do a whole hearing over Zoom. Today we're actually going to go and talk about something that's even a little bit more common than just hearings, how to actually conduct depositions. People have been doing remote depositions for years, but now they are more important than ever. So just going to our speakers today. So there's myself and Jeremiah, or whoever's closing this, if you can go advance the next slide. Great. So myself, I am the founder and managing director of Docket Alarm. Docket Alarm's a legal technology company specializing in managing people's dockets and being able to perform research across the entire court system, tracking cases and performing analytics on those cases. My background, I was actually originally a software engineer, then became an intellectual property attorney, and then founded Docket Alarm while I was an IP attorney. Today, as a guest on their show, who's actually really specializes in remote depositions, is Jeremiah Kelman. He is also a former litigator, and I actually met Jeremiah not as really an attorney, but as a legal tech founder. We kind of went to a number of the same conferences together. We started our companies roughly around the same time, within a year or two of each other, and kind of went through the startup trenches together in many ways. And Jeremiah has actually been pretty successful. So this is actually a second one of his companies that he started, TrialEdge. And this comes, I think, primarily from his experience being a litigator and conducting a lot of hearings, but in presentations for major clients. He's going to talk to us quite a bit about his background and about his company, and we'll launch right into that. I just want to set the stage quickly. If we can go to the next slide, just really very briefly about video depositions. We've actually just ran some numbers. One of the things that Docket Alarm can do is we can actually build analytics, litigation analytics, on just about any type of event that can occur in litigation. And here's just kind of a chart showing the number of times that video depositions were scheduled on court dockets. And you can see just the rise over time. It's been a steady increase and kind of more sustained increase up through January, up through 2018. And what we're really seeing here is not so much the effect of COVID-19 as much as the effect of technology. As video depositions become cheaper, become more accessible, as attorneys learn how to perform them more, they're not going to just become a nice convenience. They're going to become something that's a necessary part of the litigation experience. And so today we're going to have Jeremiah, who really specializes in video depositions, talk to us quite a bit about the different types of video depositions and how to conduct them, types of software that we can use to help us conduct them smoothly. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jeremiah. So Jeremiah, why don't you kind of give us a little bit of background on both yourself and your company, what TrialEdge is all about?
Sure. Thanks, Michael. I really appreciate that. As Michael mentioned, I am essentially a technologist. Have created several litigation service and software companies designed to really help lawyers and law firms better utilize technology to improve their, everything that they do day to day. And so one of the companies that I started when I left Big Law, I was previously a lawyer at Irell and Manella for about 7 years before starting TrialEdge, which is a full service trial graphics firm. I also am the founder of Evercron, which is a litigation management platform, a collaborative litigation management software, as well as the e-discovery group that Evercron has, which provides sort of boutique mid-firm e-discovery solutions. And that's how I met Michael, as he mentioned. Now, how does someone who is doing these sorts of things with TrialEdge end up getting into video depositions and remote depositions? Well, as you can imagine, when COVID-19 hit, a lot of my clients came to me asking for support and help because in the trial context and in arbitrations, especially, we have had the opportunity to help our clients remotely conduct these hearings. So for example, completely remote arbitrations. And so that led to doing a lot of research very quickly, further getting up to speed, and sort of ground up really kind of looking at what the best options are in terms of being able to have a very successful remote deposition. And so with that, we have our own virtual deposition service we call Virtual Depo by TrialEdge that we've created that is our own kind of solution for this. I'm going to be talking more broadly today about all the different options that you may have looking at various support options out there in the market.
So just to summarize, it sounds like you kind of had this company kind of up and running, and when COVID-19 hit, you put together a slew of different services for attorneys who are kind of already moving towards remote depositions to kind of really jump into it. Is that the idea?
Exactly. These are things that I've been working on for a long time in the background, and we'll get to it. It'll make more sense as we get into it. One of the things that we do is we provide what are called Hotseats or trial technicians in court. And so one of the things that we've done is bring that sort of solution to the table to further assist attorneys in their remote deposition environment.
Very good. All right, yeah, let's set the table for us and tell us a little bit about
Sure.
what is going on right now in litigation and remote depositions.
Sure. So Michael showed you the chart that sort of the analytics that Docket Alarm was able to provide on increasing remote video depositions. Definitely on top of that, we are seeing dramatic increases in remote depositions across the country, and there's, I think, a lot of sort of transition right now in terms of lawyers getting on board with this. I think that for the most part, we don't know how long things are going to transition back, and it's really important for cases to push forward and not continue to increase court backup. And a lot of the states and courts have put in place policy to continue to push the cases forward. As an example, in California, Governor Newsom has introduced emergency orders that the courts have adopted to allow remote depositions explicitly. And I did a quick search on Docket Alarm. It took me about, I wanted to see, okay, let's look at California and see what's going on with remote depositions. And in a matter of 5 or 10 minutes, I came up with this case, which I thought was interesting. And really, I think reflects a lot of what's going on today, right now, where there are parties that are going to resist continuing their cases remotely. I don't know if it's strategic, but for various reasons. In this case, one of the parties argued, which is probably happening elsewhere, including in arbitrations. This is unworkable, it's unfair, it's cumbersome, is it secure? And what's happening is the courts, realizing that they have to move cases forward, are just rejecting these arguments. And this is what happened here. You see the court saying, listen, attorneys across the country are adapting. You need to adapt. We need to adopt technology to move forward. And so denying the motion to stop deposition proceedings and ordering remote depositions here.
Amazing.
I think you'll continue to see a lot. Yeah.
COVID-19 COVID-19 is no longer an excuse to stop all depositions, or at least not across the board.
I don't think so, and I think we as an industry, as as lawyers, should seriously think about what's in the best interest of everybody, of the system, of our clients. That it doesn't really help anybody in the long run, including your client, if you look at the big picture, to really gum up the system and not continue to go forward, not to do work on our cases.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to talk about how the technology is available today. It's not something we need to be afraid of. And that if we embrace it, we actually can have a great experience with what's available today.
Great. I think that's what people are dying to know today.
Awesome. So I think if you look out there at the available options, if you talk to court reporting firms, if you talk to various vendors, you're going to see a number of solutions that are being proposed. There's sort of in a way, two main camps. The leading one right now involves, if you look at sort of some of the national court reporting firms as well, involves use of web-based conferencing, general purpose web conferences like Zoom, in particular Zoom, and I'll get to why that is. And then you'll also see some specifically designed court reporting web applications that essentially do video conferencing, but put front and center a real-time transcript. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about those solutions. You can look at those yourself in the context of what I'm going to show you today, and decide for yourself whether those meet your needs. I'm going to focus on what I think is probably the best option for most people, which is going to be the solutions that involve general purpose applications. So in looking at technology options for remote depositions, I sit and think, okay, let's go back to what you as a lawyer need in the real world context, and practically in the technology or the remote context. What do you really need for a good experience to succeed? What would you want walking into it? How do you mirror as closely as possible the real world experience? So the first thing is ease of use, right? You do need a solution that anybody can walk into a remote deposition context and get started right away, including, most importantly, someone you don't have as much control over, which is the witness. What technology are they familiar with? So you need to have something that requires little to no training. So that's another reason why general purpose tools, web conferencing tools, are the best option, because they're built to allow people who have no training to use them.
So unlike a specific, like a system made for depositions, if somebody gets sent a Zoom link, they probably know how to open that up rather than a complicated trial, discovery tool, right?
Exactly. And look, as a legal tech founder, I love lawyer, driven software designed for lawyers. But in this context, I have to recommend what's kind of best for lawyers at this time. And this ease of use, this little to no training requirement, sort of steers us, I think, away from that direction.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm not going to get into much into the security issues here. You'll probably hear a lot about things about Zoom. I think a lot's changing fast with that. I recommend everybody look into that and get to their own comfort level.
Jeremiah, if I may, we actually did a session on a bunch of class action lawsuits that were coming out of COVID-19, and Zoom is now involved with some pretty heavy duty class action lawsuits.
Sure.
I actually did follow up on it. They are changing their software today to accommodate a lot of these security issues, but
they've made a lot of changes, and one thing to distinguish is between how those tools are used widely with consumers and free versions that don't have all the settings in place, and how you use it in an enterprise context professionally with proper settings in place, as well as the additional items they've added in terms of encryption control and things like that.
Right.
So that is something that you can look at. I think, in my personal opinion, everybody has to reach their own on this. If you look at today, what I've seen they've done with proper settings, with the changes that have been put in place, you do need to, I think with anything, you got to balance the ease of use and convenience. And we do need to get back to work here. Us lawyers, we need solutions that are available. And so this all has to be balanced. The next thing is hassle-free document presentation. I think it's very important. This is a very important area that's often overlooked. And when you're examining how you're going to accomplish your remote deposition, this is one of the most important things to really zero in and think about. In a normal deposition, we just show up. There's a court reporter there. There might be a videographer in the room. You sit around a conference table, you have your documents, and you hand around documents. And it just happens. You know exactly what to do. What does that look like, though, in the remote environment? And it's very different depending on the solutions that are provided to you. The last thing is, if you are going to do a video deposition, and then that may not apply to everybody, and I'll talk about that. Plenty of depositions are taken with just a transcript. But if you do want a video recording, you're going to want to think about how that happens in the remote environment and what the solution is for that. So what are the sort of options using general purpose web conferences for, in particular, introducing documents? So the first option that you'll see that may be available is, the simplest is web conference plus a remote shorthand reporter, or stenographer. This would be the option if you're not needing video. The next option to layer on is a remote videographer to handle the video recording. But there's another option that's available, which is the option that my company provides, which is you can substitute a Depo Hotseat, which is essentially converting over from the trial world a document presenter, an expert in document presentation, to run both the video recording as well as presenting evidence and introducing exhibits for you in a deposition. I like to add one more layer that applies in all of these contexts. Looks like I had an animation glitch there. Basically is additional support, okay? And after this, you're gonna wanna think about what support your vendor is providing to make sure that when the deposition starts, you don't have to worry that the witness's video and audio works, right? Anytime you have a webinar, you have a remote conference or anything, you need to test the audio connections and video connections of the speaker. And so you're gonna need that kind of support. So let's look at just option one at the most basic level, and how do you share documents? And these ways of sharing documents are going to carry through across all of the different variations that I just showed you, with some important distinctions that I'll talk about. So the first way is drag and drop into the chat window. So for example, at least in Zoom. So Zoom has a way to ad hoc add documents into a chat window and share them to all participants. The second way is to use a shared file and folder system. An example of that would be box.com or Dropbox or something like that. Box is sort of a more corporate version of Dropbox. You'll see a number of the national court reporting firms, as well as my company, use a system like this, either Box or something like it. And the way that works, I'll show you, kind of to give you an idea, is you would have a shared exhibit folder, and during the deposition, the attorneys would drag and drop into here exhibits that they would rename as you're marking, essentially electronically marking your exhibits. The court reporter can then stamp these afterwards. The nice thing here too is you can then preview your documents. Each person in the web browser can preview their documents as they're introduced, or download them. One good way to do this is for each side to have their own sort of private folder in the system, online private folder, and then you have your shared folder. And that makes it easy to sort of, without having to go between your file system and the browser, you can just rename your files and move them over.
So just to clarify, so each side would have a private box or a private Dropbox. Then when they want to introduce something into evidence, they move it from their private Dropbox into kind of the shared Dropbox and rename it with whatever exhibit number is warranted. So
exactly, and you are going to need the court reporter to verify and keep track of this, right? Because the court reporter is going to need to know that the correct exhibit that's being introduced on the record is what's been marked, so they can stamp them after the deposition. There's some variations on this that various vendors have provided. For example, they've created some custom, one has created a something that sort of help, you just have an additional step that it puts in the middle where you, instead of renaming, and you introduce, and then it lets you, sort of add a stamp and do that. But I think the simplest and cleanest way to do this is really to just do what I just described. But the variations can work as well.
And what's actually nice, I mean, amazing here is that this doesn't require, I'm not sure how many people are listening are savvy enough to kind of handle this, but kind of setting up your own private shared folder, and then setting up a public shared folder, and then setting up a Zoom link. It's kind of what you're saying is kind of sufficient to really get started with remote depositions.
Definitely, it's totally doable. Now, it depends. There are layers to this, and so it definitely, there's a downside to it, right? There's pros and cons. But for practical purposes, for budget reasons, this may be the option that you have. And so if you do have that, you're going to want to practice this. You're going to want to get familiar with the tools, get familiar with Zoom, get familiar with the file system. I will talk in a bit about how there's an option to streamline that also, that you, the lawyer, can just question the witness and don't have to worry about any of this. But I think for budget reasons, practical reasons of what's available, you might have to deal with this. And like Michael said, it's totally doable. This, just to give you an idea here, is kind of how you could, either in separate windows or on the same computer, kind of have side by side the documents and your Zoom conference. Now, finally, the last way is a screen share, and that can be used in conjunction with what I just showed you. So again, now we are getting into something where this may not be the best route for everyone. You want to focus on your deposition, not running a screen share. So for a lot of depositions, this probably isn't practical unless you're very kind of tech savvy and you like dealing with technology. But if you do, or you have someone on your team that's willing to do this for you, is you would share your screen, open up a document viewer, and everyone would be able to see where you're going. So I'm gonna quickly go through some of the reasons why, if you're looking at these options, why were people choosing Zoom? What about different conferencing apps make this useful? Well, number one, a reliable screen share is important because of that functionality that I just told you about. Ease of use and little to no training, I talked about that. But one thing to note is the Zoom part of it isn't as easy as it sounds. It's not something you could just sort of set up yourself. This does require a qualified vendor to properly implement this. If you go in the back, most people are not aware of this, but if you go into the background of Zoom, there are dozens and dozens and dozens, literally, I'm showing you some of them right now, of specific in-app settings, including numerous security settings, including you can decide specifically that you won't allow anybody to come into the system from outside the United States. So no data can pass outside the United States. All of these settings can be set in the background, and so including recording settings. Now here you see cloud recording settings. Again, something that we'll get to recording, I'm gonna get to videographers, but you need someone who knows what they're doing there. And we'll come back to that.
So if you are doing this yourself, it's pretty much incumbent on you to go through every single one of those settings and really understand them.
I really would recommend that you bring in someone who knows what they're doing there. It's way harder than it sounds. The settings can be very complex, especially if you're recording. If you're not recording, then I think that could be manageable potentially. But so yeah, if what you're talking about is getting everybody in the same room so you can have a court reporter in there, get down a transcript, okay. That could be doable, but definitely you're not gonna wanna record yourself. So annotation is another feature that's available. So if you share your screen, the witness can get animation controls or annotation controls. Remote control is a little bit more sophisticated, so that allows you to grant someone else control over your screen. So for example, if you want to pull up an Excel sheet, you want the witness to manipulate it or scroll through it, that's also possible. File transfer. So it's helpful to have the in-app file transfer as well as another option, which is another just simpler base level way to do this, right? Instead of using the shared folders I talked about, you're just uploading into the chat window in Zoom. Breakout rooms are another great feature. These are being used all the time now in mediations. You're able to send individual, each side into their own breakout rooms privately on breaks, which is really nice. So what about video deliverables? Talked a little bit, I touched on that a bit.
Quickly, if we can just go back to that, because I know actually right now, especially especially when there's teams that are taking a deposition, maybe 3 people on one side or two attorneys on each side, let's say. And depending on where you are, which state you're in during COVID, you might be stuck at home, or you might be at your office doing a remote deposition from your office. So say each attorney, the 2 attorneys on each side, there's 4 attorneys, if they want to confer with themselves or maybe with a witness, is that the idea of the breakout rooms, that you can kind of confer with the other people on your side?
Correct. So this mirrors in a deposition when you go on a break or at lunch, you go in another room with your witness and you talk to them, or you talk to the associate on your case. This virtually allows you to go into a separate private room without leaving the deposition. And obviously this is meant to happen on breaks, right? You also, one of the nice things about technology that you just are not going to do in a real deposition as well, is it really forces you to think about what's at your fingertips. And you could be chatting during the deposition in a chat window in Slack or in some other system with another attorney on your team. Now, obviously, you're going to not want that to happen between. This is something people worry about between counsel and a witness, right?
Right.
But between attorneys, certainly it's a huge benefit to be able to do that. So that leaves video deliverables. This is a key sort of dividing point in a way of how you conduct these. Once you need video deliverables, you are now on sort of option 2. Option 2 is you're adding a remote videographer, essentially. And just like bringing a videographer in a courtroom, in a conference room, you're remotely bringing them into the Zoom conference or other web conferencing application. The sharing of documents is the same. Drag and drop, shared file system, screen share. But in this instance, you get a reliable and admissible recording. Theoretically, you do need somebody to understand the Zoom record settings. There are different options. Certainly, if the court reporting firm or vendor wants to provide another qualified means, for example, we substitute in a trial or a depo technician to do the video recording. Generally, to do that, you're going to need to utilize something like Zoom's cloud recording functionality, which is the most reliable way to redundantly record the video and ensure you don't have single point of failure, for example, on internet access from one person. If you're not going to use, let's say for security reasons, the client is not comfortable with that, you want to locally essentially record that, well, then you're going to need a remote videographer's expertise to do that properly.
So just to clarify, you're kind of talking about having the web conferencing software do the recording up in the cloud versus kind of having it done on your own computer, recording kind of what you're seeing on your computer, right? And these are the types of decisions that you have to be making. Got it.
That has to be made, and however it's done, it's just like when we do trials, right? Everything's redundant. When you're doing trial technology and you can't accept failure, you have to have redundancy. So you need to be able to, they take care of making sure that if one thing fails, you have another option. And that leads to trial-ready deliverables. When you have a deposition technician, right, in our instance, a Hotseat, which I'll get to what that is, that records the video, or you have a videographer recording the video. Let's look at videographers recording the video. This is your deliverable, essentially. You want to have a witness view with a timestamp, and you can even add the person's name at the bottom. In this instance, I'm using a virtual background. That is another feature of Zoom. Some people may not want that. I think most people might not. but it is a nice potential option for attorneys to consider to give a little bit more of a focused feel.
So for those who are not
yeah.
familiar, by the way, you can see right now I've got this virtual background, and you can also see how it's, depending on where I am, sometimes it works a little better than other times. My hand kind of disappears into the ether. There is definitely some personal preference issue on whether or not you want to have a virtual background. And you can see Jeremiah does not. So you might get little glimpses of somebody's apartment if you don't have one on.
Right. Now, and the truth is, I think for a virtual background, you're probably going to have both parties stipulate and agree that it's acceptable, because you are, for example, California has a rule that you can't manipulate by video the appearance of the witness. So I just think for that reason, for practical reasons, you're going to want both sides to agree if you want to do that. So the third option is another option that we provide, some other vendors I know of provide, others won't, and I'll get into that. They're going to want you to have a videographer as well, even if they do offer a Depo Hotseat, and I'll get to what a Depo Hotseat is. This is the option where, if you think about the cost of a videographer, and that videographer had to be trained to record in this remote environment, that theoretically, not just theoretically, because we do this, you can train a very technical, a Depo technician or hot seat to present evidence, someone with a lot of background in presenting evidence in court to also man the video record or handle the video record. And then for the same cost, basically, you're getting video recording and all those three options I just showed you. So drag and drop, that becomes your backup option just for last minute documents. And the other two, the deposition technician or hot seat does everything. So this is a huge, yeah.
Just to jump in here, because this is a term, when I just was going over the slides the other day. The Depo hot seat it's a person, right? It's a person who does,
yes,
who manages kind of the technology for you, and or I guess presenting evidence and does a video recording. Is that
exactly? So yeah, this next level of solution is one way or another. You have somebody who can handle the shared file system of introducing exhibits and the screen share of presenting documents effectively, okay? And I'm gonna show you guys what that looks like, but essentially it's sort of like having Alexa, but instead of AI, it's actually a smart person. So it's a little bit better than Alexa today, or a lot better.
Non-artificial intelligence.
Non-artificial, exactly.
That's right.
So let me tell you a little bit more about what that is. What is a hot seat? So at trial, a hot seat is somebody who has all the trial exhibits in a database on their computer with specialized software that can pull up any exhibit on call and zoom in and highlight particular portions of the document. With a trial technician or a Depo hot seat, what then happens is it's like being in a room in a normal deposition. You simply speak to the witness and the hot seat does everything else. If you know how to create a good record, if you can say, sir, I'd like to direct your attention to page 3. Let's take a look at the third paragraph. Do you see where you wrote this? They will follow along. So the hot seat will be able to, once documents are transmitted, let's say into a shared exhibit folder, can pull the document up on the screen for the witness and counsel to see.
So I want to actually clarify this, because this is a new role, like in litigation. I don't think, pre-remote depositions, there was no such thing as called a hot seat, or does it come from anything?
There is a hot seat at trial. So this would be a modification that would be called a Depo hot seat.
Right.
So it's called, or a Depo technician. And if you ask around, you'll see the possibilities here.
Right. So the Depo, the trial hot seat is someone who kind of puts the presentation up on the screen for the judge and the jury and make sure that they're looking at exactly the right thing. This is kind of doing exactly the same thing during a deposition.
Exactly.
That's making more sense.
And so, like we were talking about, right? Depending on budget, your self-service options, the attorney introducing and dealing with exhibits, certainly an option, right? This is sort of the next level of creating an in-room experience, right? You really now can sit there with your deposition outline and just talk. right?
This is, it's also interesting. It's in many ways like COVID-19 is creating a whole new, position out there, right? I mean, this is something that's
Right.
you wouldn't, if you're doing a live a deposition, yes, you might need a videographer, but most of the work that's being done here can be done by the attorneys, right? If you want to direct somebody's attention to a document, you just put it in front of them. But
exactly,
it's more complicated now, and it's
you
actually
can't just hand over a document today.
right. Well, and also the skills of the video technician has also changed. Before, you had to know about lenses and the different types of camera systems, right? And the physical recording equipment. Now it's much more, you have to be knowledgeable about Zoom settings and which in Zoom recording settings and the various, maybe not Zoom is the right one. Maybe we're using GoToWebinar.
GoToMeeting or Zoom or WebEx or whatever it is, but don't underestimate what that means. There are ways for vendors to simplify the process, okay, and streamline that. But depending on what the requirements are, if you need you need to have the redundancy and the backups. There's quite a bit of technology that can be involved in that. So you're presenting documents on the screen. You, the lawyer, with this option, don't really have to think about technology. 99% of everything, once you join the meeting, the conference, takes care of itself with this solution. So I'm going to show you kind of what this looks like, and I'll talk through it. But basically what would happen is, imagine you're conducting a deposition here. I'm the witness on the bottom, the lawyer's right above me. They're saying, let's look at this document. You wrote this was sent on November 21st. Okay, correct. You notice that highlighting is an option. You can decide whether you want that or not. And maybe they're asking, okay, did this come from your department? Yes, it did come from my department. And sir, I'd like to look at this last paragraph. And this is another option that may or may not make sense in a deposition, right? Generally, you want to steer more neutral. You're on a sort of a half-page Zoom like I just showed you, but you do have the option, if you really want to focus everyone in on one part, to blow up parts of the document.
It's cool. This is something that the Hotseat would be doing, right?
Correct. That just happens. You just talk. Like I said, the best way is you don't have to talk to the Hotseat. You just create a good record and they follow along, just like you would in a normal deposition. So what are the deliverables here? You now get two more potential deliverables. Essentially, you can record the witness view, which I showed you on the left, as well as, because you now have a Depo Hotseat, on the right, you see you can get the document view with a speaker overlay. And potentially, you can also record a split screen view.
Are there any issues of the third screen where they're kind of blowing things up? Are there any issues about admissibility and whether when things are getting highlighted, I guess they're being directed to be highlighted by the attorneys? Is that the idea? So it's not really, when you start highlighting things, it kind of maybe raises some issues of whether you're kind of directing.
Sure.
You're kind of directing the witness testimony by kind of highlighting certain things that they should be saying, or.
Right, so the blowing up and highlighting is a choice of the attorneys. You certainly could refrain from that. Most people generally do. However, what you're showing here is, if you were to play this in court, you're showing what you're presenting what the witness saw when they were testifying. And so you would have the witness video with the transcript as your record. And this is more of a presentation or demonstrative. At trial, we typically do this anyway. So what this is doing is, this is actually saving you some money if you're doing these kinds of cases where you bring in a trial technician. Sort of high stakes trials all do this now. You may recreate that anyway, right? So you're gonna present to the jury the deposition, and if there's an important document that's complicated, especially, you'll side-by-side present with a trial technician. This just cuts out a step where when you do your designations and edit the clips, you'll already have potentially the documents that were shown to the witness. So, do you have a question, Michael?
No, go keep going.
Okay, so there's sort of a decision tree I have of how you decide some of these options, because I know I've thrown a lot at you. I think a good question to ask at first, because there's all types of cases, all types of case budgets. Do you want a deposition video? If your answer, like many lawyers, is I don't need video, I just need a transcript, then your option's simple. You're going to do a vendor-supported Zoom conference with the self-service document exchange that I mentioned. Obviously, we went over the pros and cons. If your answer is yes, then you really do need a professional technician, a videographer, or a Depo Hotseat to support the video recording. In some instances, for example, in California, it's pretty much required. It's in the code that you need somebody that's competent in the recording equipment. And so what are your options here? I kind of went over this, and I'll kind of wrap it up on that. But your options are, number one, a videographer. That's going to have a cost. It's the same as it always is. The second is a videographer plus Hotseat. So imagine a Hotseat's the same as a videographer in cost, basically. You're just basically going to double the cost of the videographer. That's going to be the option that's going to be available to a lot of you, because that's the option that a lot of court reporting firms may offer if they do offer a Hotseat. So there can be a bit of an increase in cost there. The third option is the option that some vendors like my company and some others do, which is just a Depo Hotseat. We sub in the Hotseat for the videographer, and that is going to make it so that there's zero increase in cost essentially over a video deposition. So like I said, that essentially means that there's a fourth option where you have both a Depo videographer and a Hotseat to present evidence, Hotseat to present evidence, and then the remote videographer to record video. For our purposes, for my purposes, this is ideal in a situation where a more complicated video setup is required. For example, you want to have a videographer in the room. Maybe as we transition out, you might have a videographer in the room with the witness and everybody else is remote. Or perhaps the team decides that they don't want to store data on remote servers, so they want a local record option. So this would be the option for that. But like I said, today, if possible, I think you want to try to scoop up that option 3, either by negotiating with court reporting firms, depending on what your leverage is with them, to come up with an option that looks like that, or coming to options like my company, or finding someone who will do that.
So
the one thing I will, yeah, go ahead.
Is your company like did you kind of come up with this Hotseat solution for depositions, or is this something that's standard? Like if you went to another provider and said, hey, I want a Hotseat, will they know what you mean?
They will, they should. It may not be the first thing, and I'll tell you why, that you get presented with. So we offer our virtual Depo by TrialEdge solution. That's what I described. You can get a Hotseat from others. It may not be the first option that they provide to you. They may also require a videographer plus a Hotseat. And if you think about it, there is a scale issue, which is why I will say, I've heard about one, not even the largest national vendor, that's doing something around 50 to 70 remote depositions a day right now. I don't know how many Hotseats there are in the country, people with those qualifications, but 70 would maybe be pushing the capacity of all the Hotseats that are out there. Maybe there's 100, 150, I have not counted. So if you have the budget and you want to do option 3, or if you have the budget just for video depositions and that's the way you want to go, I would look into these options right away and try to lock them down, because for the most part, a lot of people are going to do the videographer option only, and that's fine. And the more people try to get Hotseats, the less of them there will be.
Got it.
So I was going to conclude with just some kind of overall tips for depositions once you are in the Depo, or if we need to wrap it up, we can wrap it up to go to questions.
You take 2 minutes to do your closing. I'm sure.
I'll try to do this one real quick. So things that you're just going to want to think about. If you represent the witness, you're definitely going to want to check their setting in advance. What's the lighting like? How are they going to dress? What's their background like? Test their audio. Do you want to get them, make sure they have fully charged AirPods, or do you want to make sure they have a good microphone? You're going to want to test your internet connection and your equipment. Web conferencing apps have ways to test the audio. They have ways to test your connection. You might want to look into that for yourself. You can run speed tests. I'll show you just in Zoom how you do this. So when you log into Zoom, there's a setting option that you can click on, and then that's going to give you the ability to click on this video tab, and you can test your video. Sorry, let me go back to that. I have an animation glitch there, but basically you're going to be able to, from here, test your video and your audio, as well as even the internet connection and whether you're losing packets and that sort of thing. The other thing you can do is test your speed test. So if you Google internet speed test or just speed test in Google, you will get a number of options. Ookla, you see that, and then Google's option here, run speed test. And that'll tell you your upload and your download speed. For the witness, upload is probably one of the most important since they're uploading video. And in general, you're going to want to see at least 5 megabits per second. Phone dial-in is your backup option. So a lot of times the video works, but audio is what people have trouble with. So when you look at options, any kind of option, whether it's a custom court reporting option, whether it's a conferencing application, you're going to want to look on, can people be on with computer audio and then backup phone dial-in? So can I share my video and dial in? And that's a good option to do. Ways to maximize bandwidth. You're going to want to think about this. I know it's hard. My kids are in school right now, remote school, and are in Zoom classes. And when they're out of class, I have to say they may be on the Nintendo Switch and things like that. So all of these items, to the extent possible, if the witness can have their family reduce usage, that would be helpful. That's usually helpful. Do practice runs, try it out. Definitely this is a new area. It takes some getting used to. Stipulations, you're going to want some stipulations on the record. Usually, I don't think you need much, especially with states that are explicitly promoting this, like California, but you need something just to say everybody agrees to the manner of deposition. Managing expectations. Really, look, I think this is all a great way to go. We should embrace this. We should move forward. But it is technology, some newer than others, and it's not going to work exactly like a in-person deposition, but it's better than us waiting around and having the court systems get backed up. One last question is, how do I get a real-time feed? If I'm using a conference like Zoom, some of the big court reporting vendors actually have a plugin where you can do a feed. Like I said, there's the custom apps that have real-time feeds in the app. I really think the way to focus on real-time is any court reporter can stream real-time to your iPad or to a separate browser. And that's how it would work in a deposition. You would get the real-time on a monitor, and I think that's the best way to do it. And with that, I'll wrap it up and we can go to questions if people have questions.
We definitely have questions. I'll go ahead and give you some of the more common ones, if that's okay.
Sure.
First question, is there any specific notices that have to be made for video depositions? Specifically, does it have to be noticed as a video deposition? Also, for stipulations, do you recommend that they stipulate that there might be technology glitches or that there might be privacy glitches due to the nature of the video conferencing?
And before we get into answering the questions, I'm sorry, can you just go back to the slide so people have the contact information, your contact information up on the screen? The speaker slide.
Sure, I think that was slide probably 3. Let's see.
2 or 3. One back. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so there's my contact info. I'm also on LinkedIn as a good way to reach out to me as well. Okay, so the question is notices and stipulations. We'll start with that before we get into the privacy stipulation, which you mentioned. I think it is best practice or a good idea to include something about the manner of deposition in your notice. Something you're going to want something to the effect that this is a video deposition. It's going to be conducted remotely via web conference. We're going to be sharing documents in the following way. The parties agree to this manner and waive all objections to based on the manner of deposition, right? They're not actually waiving objections, but they're waiving it based on that nature of remote recording. Generally, if you ask a vendor, obviously they're not going to give you legal advice, but vendors tend to have sample notices that you might want to look at. you're also going to want to look at the rules in your jurisdiction. But I do think belt and suspenders, it's a good idea. Stipulations on, I guess, okay, the next question was, I can't remember what it was. It was on stipulations.
Aaron, do you want to repeat the question?
Yeah.
The question was regarding stipulations for privacy. It's things like somebody perhaps trying to Zoom bomb or otherwise interfere with the teleconference.
I mean, I think you can include something like that. I mean, you got to be practical about this stuff too, because you could stipulate for like an hour on the, you know, for like 10 minutes on the record. And I think that, you know, you can do what you're comfortable with, whatever the parties want. Certainly at least stipulate that everybody agrees that we're doing this remotely. If you want to do something that, you know, there can be technology glitches and the parties will take reasonable steps to accommodate and correct those glitches, including but not limited to, you know, potential follow-up depositions to address the, you know, the testimony that could have been presented or something like that.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Other question? That's part of the set here. Just, do you foresee judges accommodating this? Do you foresee judges participating in this type of venture? Do you see more bench trials or things of that nature becoming part of Zoom conferences?
Okay, so bench trials and arbitrations are, like, if this is a difficult thing to think about, a bench trial or an arbitration is like a no-brainer. Like a bench trial remotely or an arbitration is, you're going to support it with the hot seat and you don't need to record it, and it just is done. You're done, right? You bring in a remote hot seat or that trial technician I told you about, and you now can present evidence to the judge and everybody else on the screen and the witnesses. You could share documents if you need to. You can even, you're not coming up with exhibits that no one's seen before. You have a list of exhibits, right? So it's not like you have to introduce new things. You can send a binder at the last minute to a witness, or you can transmit as you go, you know, a set, right before you question the witness. So I think that for sure this is going to be embraced by judges. What's happening is, if you could even imagine the amount of backup that's happening with courts right now. You know, you had 100 trials a day, or you know, in some jurisdictions and around the country going down to 0. And even the states that are going back to work right now, they're not going to see civil jury trials, because you're going to start with family law and criminal law first cases. You're going to see those until the fall. So everything's been pushed way out. And so I think the judges do realize that this needs to happen to some degree.
Excellent. Okay. One last question, because I know we're running low on time. Do you recommend training a paralegal to be a part of this type of Zoom conference, perhaps to supplement, or in some cases be the hot seat for the presentation?
Sure, I think that is an option. Obviously, with budget, a hot seat's going to be the most streamlined and fluid. But if you have a paralegal that's available, then that certainly is an option. I would obviously, your client's going to have to consider what's more costly, having a paralegal or having a vendor support it. But if you don't have that support available and you have a paralegal available or an associate, that is another good way to go, because I do think it is nice for an attorney not to have to worry about the technology as much.
They have enough on their minds.
Yeah, definitely. It's a hard job.
Well, gentlemen, do you have any closing thoughts?
Jeremiah, go ahead.
I think I've said a lot already, but
yeah.
I will just say, I think this is exciting. I think that this provides a lot of opportunities for us to, move cases forward, which is a good thing for all law firms. I really do actually think that once people see that this is that this works, that even after we go back to quote unquote normal, people will start to question, flying around the country for every deposition, and we'll continue to look at this as an option.
I will just close out with a pitch for our next episode. So we're doing these every Friday, 12 p.m. Eastern. Our next episode is episode 10, our 10th one. We're going to be actually interviewing a mediator who does part of the American Arbitration Association, and she's going to, an arbitrator slash mediator. She's going to be telling us how basically remote mediations are going on. There's probably going to be a little bit of overlap here with Jeremiah, and hopefully she'll agree with him that they're easier than depositions, but we'll see. So if you have any upcoming mediations that are going on or are involved in any arbitration or any alternative dispute resolution, this might be of interest to you. Again, it's on Friday at 12 p.m. You know, I'm really enjoying doing these. It gives me an excuse to shave once a week. So I'm gonna keep on doing that. If you want to stay up to date and with what's going on with these shows, you can follow us. Please take a look at our Docket Alarm YouTube channel, which we just launched literally like a week ago. We don't have very many subscribers, so please subscribe to our Docket Alarm YouTube channel. You see all these webinars are gonna be posted for free. You can also find, email me, michael@docketalarm.com, or you can follow me on Twitter, which is just @speedplane. Coming back to my old engineering roots. Thank you very much, Jeremiah. Thank you, Aaron, for putting this all together. And hopefully see you again next week. Thanks very much.